Ladies and gentlemen, we are here with Season 4, Episode 17, Somepony, To Watch Over Me. An episode... an episode in which Apple Bloom is allowed to stay at home, and then Applejack goes insane, and then there's a swamp and a chimera, and everyone learns a lesson in the end. Okay, as usual, let's start with the journal entry, which is from Applejack. I cannot remember a day when I wasn't Apple Bloom's big sister. Why, it's been my job to protect that little filly and keep her safe since the day she was born. It's a job that never gets scratched off my checklist because it's not a chore, it's an honor. So, it's mighty hard for me to pony up to the fact that little Philly will have her cutie mark before I know it, and soon be looking me square in the eye when we're bucking apples. But after what I've seen today, I realize that perhaps I've gotten a bit overprotective and have been babying her a bit much. In fact, I think it's high time for me to loosen the reins on Apple Bloom. Still, she will always be my baby sister. Where to begin? Alright. Let's go through this linearly, shall we? I do like how they all take the decision to leave Apple Bloom home alone very seriously, for two big reasons. First of all, and second of all, because in Equestria they tend to treat everything relatively more normal and down to earth as more serious than we would because they don't have to deal with actually terrifying things, right? For the most part. So it makes sense it'd be a big deal. But the first of all I skipped over because I yawned was... That's a big deal in real life. How many of you remember the first time you were allowed to stay home alone? Like, it was a thing. You know, it was a time in which it was acceptable for you to be okay and taking care of yourself by yourself. Because if you leave a 3-year-old, pretty much regardless of circumstance, right? I actually remember when my mom first was okay with me doing that. Now, I was an only child at the time, so, you know, that wasn't a huge deal, and honestly, I was pretty young because Mom was working a lot in order to pay the bills, so I just kind of had to take care of the house. But the point being, I do remember that. It was an interesting memory. I was 7, for reference. And, yeah, it was this big old, you know, well, okay. It went fine. You know, I didn't go to the fire swamp or anything like that. And of course, there's another layer to this, though. The other layer is, this is a farm. Farms are a lot of work. I've mentioned before, I've worked on a farm before, but that was like a much smaller farm than this. So, you know, what I'm trying to say is I understand how much work it is to deal with a small-scale farm when you have help. Doing the chores on a much larger-scale farm by yourself... And yeah, the very first thing Apple Bloom does, the very first thing after they wander off, is she celebrates. But then the second thing she does immediately after that is she does the chores, of which there are quite a few. So again, this makes perfect sense. It's a big deal, and they treat it as such, and it's a serious responsibility. If I might be so bold, if the episode had been about Apple Bloom, just handling and dealing with the farm, I would have been a lot more okay with this episode. Then Applejack decides to start, well, helicopter mothering. Let's just call it what it is. Someone in chat actually called it that earlier. And Big Mac just kind of rolls his eyes. About 24 minutes. You know, I had to watch the episode before I could talk about it. And Applejack decides to come back and be an idiot. Now... The first thing I want to comment on very quick before I get off on Applejack is, did you notice that when everyone was saying bye, Big Mac actually said, yup? I just wanted to share that because it was actually funny, and there's not a lot about this episode that I found actually funny. So Apple Bloom does all of her chores immediately, gets them done before Applejack even gets home. And this is where the episode simultaneously gets my attention and loses me in the same motion. So here's the thing. I have a big brother instinct pretty hard. I tend to be very protective, and I have had to work over the years to bring that down to protective from what it used to be, which was overprotective. Now, time and experience have kind of helped with that, because I do firmly believe that there is such a thing as too much coddling. You do have to let people make mistakes. It's just you have to understand there's a difference between accidentally burning your finger on the stove and wandering around in the highway by yourself on foot. You know, there's a bit of a gap between those two things, right? So there should still be a safety net, but you need to not smother. And finding that balance is, well, it's a thing. That's what being an adult is kind of about when it's around being around kids. So on the one hand, I understand where Applejack's coming from. I'm a fretter. You know, I'm a worrywart. I'm like, oh God, is she going to be okay? Is she going to be okay? Nope, she's going to be okay. Just got to trust her. And then she goes back and decides, oh no, I need to help out. And what's the very first thing Applejack does? Ignores her. You caught that, right? Applebloom's like, no, I'm fine. This is all your fault. Applejack takes that the wrong way. Applebloom doesn't clarify. And then Applejack ignores her so that Applebloom then gets into more trouble, which leads to Applejack's confirmation. Oh my God, things are worse than I thought. Time to be stupid. And then, well, then we hit the middle part of the episode, which is by far my least favorite part of the episode. Because I know it's a cartoon. I know it's for kids. But the severity and extent to which she goes is actually kind of ludicrous. That being said, it did make me laugh once. Just the one time. But, so let's see. She pillows the rake. Okay. Hat. And then she puts nets in the trees, which is actually kind of a stupid idea for several reasons. That's really going to screw up the apple harvest. And then hat. Then she had stabilizing wheels to the wheelbarrow. Actually, that I'm perfectly fine with that. Why did that seems like the kind of thing should probably be anyways. It's going to reduce its maneuverability, but that, right? Anyways. Hat. And that's, I keep mentioning the hat thing because what follows up is then she goes inside. Applebloom goes inside, and Applejack has bubble wrapped everything to baby-proof everything. And then she puts a hat on top of the other hat. That did make me laugh. That did get a chuckle out of me. But this is just... What? Now, I'm still willing to forgive this a little bit. Just a little. And I want to explain why. Because Applejack... how do I phrase this? Because what Applejack's going through here is a very clear sign of... I don't actually know what to call it. Let's call it worst fear syndrome. It's when you are faced with the possibility of your worst fear actually coming true. Now, I mentioned that it's not really present in the first part of the episode. It's actually part of the last part of the episode. But in the first part of the episode, you see her just kind of joking around and screwing around and trying to make this thing happen, and it's just kind of ridiculous. And then... So then the kids decide to come up with a zany plan in order to make this thing work, because of course they do. You got to have a zany plan. That's how that works. And I have to admit, this is now 3 jokes this episode made, which actually made me laugh. I just have to start a song. No time for singing. No time for singing. This is, I believe, the first time they've really acknowledged the singing in lore. And it will not be the last. But anyway, so she gets away, gets on the bales of hair, takes the pie thing out, and they start pretending to be her, and Applejack goes completely nutso with checking in on her. Then she says, maybe I don't need to check in on her after all. Then she discovers that Applebloom is gone. I've experienced that once in my life. I've actually talked about this before. Once in my life. Yeah, Scootaloo ruins it. Just, what the heck, Scootaloo? There was one point where I was taking care of my niece, and I called out for her, and she didn't respond. So I went looking for her and didn't find her. and didn't find her, and didn't find her. And basically every second that I was failing to find her while calling out for her, the panic got a little bit worse. Now, when I actually found her, she was fine. She was just drawing and wasn't paying attention and didn't respond to me. But I have never forgotten what it felt like. It was a very short period of time. It was like 20 seconds. Because I found her very quickly because there's not a lot of places she can hide. And I knew, where she had been revisited. You get the idea. But for those 20 seconds, that was just a non-stop escalation of panic. Just way up there. And I know exactly what that feels like. And that's pretty much what Applejack goes through. Because then, well, I've talked about this concept before in fiction and in real life. Let's say you're afraid of something. You're afraid of dropping your coin. You're so afraid of it. You clench the coin. You can't let go of the coin. You can't let go of the... But then you start to calm down. You're like, you know what? I'm being a little bit ridiculous. Maybe I shouldn't have to hold on to the coin. And then you drop the coin. That is so much worse than if you had just dropped the coin to begin with. This might be the worst analogy I've ever made. If you had just dropped the coin to begin with, it would just be like, and then you deal with it. But because of the buildup and then the moment of, oh, it's fine, no, actually it's worse than you thought it was, that is a horrific feeling. So she's learning that Apple was not just missing, but actually went on one of the most dangerous things she could go on. Yeah. This then goes into that adult fear thing and the panic and whatever else you want to call it. I think Big Mac just thought she wasn't going to go to the extremes she did SA2K, if I'm being honest. So then we go back to the swamp, and by back to I mean to the swamp for the first time. To my knowledge, this is the first time we've seen this swamp, and I don't actually think we'll see it after this point. It is naturally the swamp has fire jets in it because of course it does. But this swamp, this is a good time to qualify as something I like to call outer Equestria. I've talked about this several times before. You got core Equestria, which is idyllic and controlled and peaceful and paradisal, and then you kind of have outer Equestria, which is still being settled. Still, there's people who live there, but it hasn't actually been fixed. I don't know what to actually call that yet. So, fixed, repaired, whatever. So it's still kind of the wild, but it's not, horrific. And then you have outside of Equestria entirely, which is usually much, much, much worse. We do see hints of that every now and again. And forgive me for talking so much about this, but it's the best part of the episode, in my opinion. The way they portray the swamp and the idea of this place being kind of, deadly and horrible is interesting. They then show the Chimera, and that got me thinking, too. First of all, credit for the fact that the Chimera is female, which, at the moment, no, although someone already nominated the MLP movie, so, maybe that'll be a thing over on the Ruminations side of things. It'll be funny, because that'll mean I'll watch the movie way before it actually happens. If it gets voted in, obviously, because we're not at the voting stage yet. So, actually, before I talk about the world building, I want to say something really quick. Ellen Kennedy does the voices for the Chimera, all three of them. And you're probably thinking, who's that? Ellen Kennedy is an excellent voice actress who has done an absolutely enormous amount of voice acting over the years. She's very talented and she's very prolific. You have probably heard her. But to use a specific example, she voiced the Maniac in Power Ponies earlier this season. And I talked about how awesome she was there, too. I just wanted to point that out because she came back for the Chimeras. And yeah, she voices all three of them. Anywho. Also, the snake was hard of hearing. That was kind of neat. So, the Chimera is okay with eating ponies. So, it's some kind of a predator, obviously. I wonder what the local ponies do to deal with Chimera. Or is there just one? Is there multiple? I wonder if creatures like this are dealt with more, for lack of a better way to put it, militarily or diplomatically. What I mean by that is this creature obviously likes pies, right? That's an established fact. In fact, its main interest was in eating the pies. So yeah, bribery... bribery feels like a weird word. Let me put this another way. The ponies probably have the ability to go out and kill the Chimera. Let's just say that straight. Or, if we want to try and be nice, which I could see ponies trying to be, they could reach out and be like, hey, we'll give you this, you continue to exist, we continue to exist, we leave each other alone. Just food for thought. Now, the Chimera also mentioned that they haven't eaten in several days, which is kind of eyebrow-raising. But I can't help but point out that this delivery was something that's kind of a dangerous delivery that was put off a bit, and maybe the whole reason that they haven't eaten recently is because of the fact that the pies weren't delivered, and maybe that's what they needed the pies for, other than just selling. Because there were quite a few pies left over after the people were eating them in the town. You get where I'm going with this. Now, this is all headcanon. I don't know if any of this is true or not. But it really got me thinking, because I could see the ponies being the kind of people to try and talk their way through the situation and try to be nice about it, rather than descend in the troops, so to speak. Because we do see that ponies can beat the Chimera. Applejack effortlessly defeats the Chimera. She knows exactly what their weaknesses are, and she uses them perfectly. So... just makes me wonder, like I said. Look at my notes. No, so okay. So then the episode loses me again, because we have this big extended thing, and there's this very brief moment where the Chimera tiger complains about the Chimera goat. You know, you have no idea what it's like having a sister over your shoulder. And for just a second, I'm like, okay, so maybe she's going to be able to talk her way through this situation. This is a sentient creature, fully sentient and sapient. There's, again, diplomacy, right? To talk her way through the situation and to resolve the situation herself. Now, on the one hand, I would have liked that, because it would have mean Apple Bloom would have demonstrably shown that, you know, she's fine by dealing with a dangerous situation. On the other hand, I would have very much disliked that, because... well, this is a dangerous situation, and as I mentioned before, I don't want kids thinking it's okay to go play in traffic, right? Like I said, there's a difference between burning yourself on the stove and jumping in front of a car. And fighting a Chimera feels a little more in the car category than the stove category. But at the same time, I think that would have followed the overall approach of the story better. I wouldn't be surprised if there was some executive meddling to prevent that from happening. Because... that's an interesting question. Because what the... I completely lost my train of thought now. Because it feels like what happens then is that all of a sudden, you know, Applejack jumps in, uses the item she mentioned earlier, effortlessly defeats the Chimera and saves the day, but Apple Bloom proves that she was responsible after all by saving the pies. Even though she didn't really do that on purpose, she would just, you know, was just being stubborn, so... and then lesson learned, I guess? I do like how the ricotta is how she defeats the goat. Anyways, thank you very much, Jan. Very much appreciate those bits. Thank you. Now, you're asking how much does a full rumination of something cost? There's no price, which is why I'm confused by the question a little bit. And, of course, you probably can't even hear me right now, since you're having issues with getting the stream running. It depends, is really the answer. It would depend on the specific thing. I do. It's right there. So the episode then just kind of wraps up a little bit. Now there's the swamp. How does the swamp village pay for the pies, I wonder? Odd question. Like, do they trade a specific good for it? Or do they trade in bits? If they have bits, how do they get a hold of those bits? Because bits are a currency, which means they are something you trade for. Which brings me back to the core question. How are they paying for it? Just an odd question, because I didn't see anything in the panning shots of the town that indicated they had anything of value, but obviously, you know, there might be something in the swamp. I don't know. So then the episode ends. I got a comment about 20 minutes ago that says I'm too negative. And hear me out for a second. It was a well-written comment. It was a well-designed comment. It mentioned how I focus on the negative more than the positive, and how, you know, in general I tend to be more focused on negative things than positive things. Now that's certainly valid of a thing. Maybe, I don't know. I have no way of judging that. I am myself. I can't really judge myself. But I mentioned that because, well, this episode made me laugh several times. This episode sucks, in my opinion. What the heck? Every time I try to defend this episode, it's one of those, you really gotta twist yourself way over here in order to try and make it make sense. And anytime, I've had this rule for years and years and years, since before high school, I've had this rule. Or if you have to really twist yourself into a pretzel to try and make something less bad, then it's bad, and just accept that. I'm giving this a blue. This episode was just, what the crap? I can't even say I'm down with the concept. I was down with the first 5 minutes. And that's it. Now, this is actually interesting. This episode was written by Scott Sonneborn. You're probably thinking, who's that? Good question. This is his first episode for the show. Don't know if that's related, but it's something to mention. Yeah, no. So, I imagine... I'm sorry, Mr. Sonneborn, even though you will never see this video. Not super impressed. I am also going to give this a bare minimum of 1 counter-continuity counter, because in my honest opinion, Applejack is actually out of character here. Like, legitimately out of character. And I don't even know what to make of that, honestly. Just, what? No, that bothers me. That's why I say it's out of character, Shikor. And now you're catching me. Twitch latency. What can I do? Just imagine, if I was streaming on YouTube, we'd have closer to like a minute of latency. Sometimes 2 minutes. It's really bad. I know, SA2K, we've got the Rarity and Sweetie Belle episode coming up at some point. So that's an interesting question, Baron. I suppose the answer is yes, but at the same time, no? So, hang on. Let's actually talk about Baron's point before we chop off here. I've heard a lot of people say that having too large of a writing staff is a bad thing when it comes to TV shows. Allow me to say professionally that I don't agree with that. And I want to explain why. In my opinion, and this is based on some evidence as well, the best path, the best management policy for the writing staff is you've got a core group of writers, right? Not that many of them, 3, 4, 5. And these guys all know the show, and they know what they're doing, and they're all connected to the showrunner, who may also be one of those writers. You know, so they've got those effectively form the mainliner of the show, and all of them have final say, and all of them do the editing work and breaking work. Okay. Then you bring in lots of other writers, sometimes just for one episode, sometimes for multiple. Sometimes they just pitch an episode, in which case they get credit, but you take the episode and turn it into something that works. Star Trek did that all the time. Someone would pitch an idea, they would get paid for the idea, that script would be taken and then turned into an episode, right? That is a concept I'm totally cool with. So bringing in a bunch of other writers, I'm actually totally down for. And for many reasons, but the most obvious being creativity. One person will run out of creativity at a certain point in time. 5 people will run out of creativity at a certain point. Keeping the variety into the mix is, in my opinion, an extremely important thing when it comes to creative works. It's one of the reasons why, if I ever do actually start pushing the Extant series, I will be constantly soundboarding ideas off of other people to get ideas and concepts and to make it so that it's not just coming from one mind. Because one mind can only think so far. And I've seen that a bajillion times in real-life history. Not just with fiction, but with other things. With problem-solving issues, with strategy when it comes to military stuff, with engineering concepts, with management concepts. So, I don't know what the behind-the-scenes policy was for how they deal with new writers, but I am completely down with lots of writers, as long as it's dealt with properly. Now, you do basically need a writer-manager if you're going to do that approach. I don't know if they had one on MLP. I mean, I know originally it was Faust was that for season 1, but she left after season 1. Like, she barely had anything to do with season 2, and then she peaced out. So, I have no idea if they really had one going forwards. As I say, M.A. Larson, I know I've heard his name a couple of times. He's had some interesting inferences both in and out of the series. He hasn't actually written an episode since season 3. That's interesting. But anyways, so with that discussion about writing out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and chop off the local recording.